to the Three Beards podcast. My name is Craig, along with Austin and Chris.
Passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century.
Let me out.
I'm afraid that is right.
Then live to send the innocent to their death? Is this justice and honor in Massachusetts colony?
Hey, there's a surprise. I made it. So I think it's an early, was it Mercury retrograde? My modem took an absolute, it just went out on me. And so I'm scrambling. So I'm over at a neighbor's house right now using their Wi-Fi. So so luckily, but you know, I hate to do it live on the air, but Kathleen, it's a pleasure meeting you. How are you?
Thank you. Very nice to meet you too.
All right, so everybody, so what we'll do is right here. I had an intro here, so what we'll go. We'll start here. We'll go. One of the most notorious. That's the wrong page. Here, let's try this. Here. One of the infamous. We'll try that one. Yeah, Sunday, September 17th, 1961. Betty and Barney Hill headed out for what they thought was going to be, you know, just the perfect honeymoon. You know, they didn't get one when they first were married, so they set out. And they just, you know, loaded up the dog, Dulcie, you know, headed on a journey. But little did they know that they were set to set the standard for what UFO encounters and abductions have used for their lexicon. Kathleen Marden is with us, and she has captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. Kathleen, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. And
so Mark Eddy has also joined us. You two are well acquainted. You've been on Nightlight before with Mark Eddy. Mark, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. And when I was showing Kathleen before the show, there's her alien abductions file. And besides being on Nightlight, we've actually met, and I got her autograph copy of the book too.
That's awesome.
Well, hopefully I'll get lucky sometime and I'll do that. But if you can't tell, I've got a few things. Got a few things.
Captured's a wonderful book. I have my own copy as well. And
you can find more information on Kathleen as well on Kathleen-Marden.com. And if you want, well, we can take a couple minutes right here and just gratuitous plug of your talents. You know, you've formal training as social scientist and educator, and you hold a BA degree from the University of New Hampshire. You participated in graduate studies at the University of Cincinnati. You've 15 years an educator. You've innovated, designed, and implemented model educational programs. You have taught education classes on UFO and abduction history. Since leaving your profession in 1990, you've basically from there on, you have been a devout UFO, you know, lecturer, investigator. And for anybody that doesn't know, Kathleen is also the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. So did I miss anything?
Oh, you said enough.
Awesome.
There's a lot more, but that's okay. People can read.
Yep. Yeah. No, it was with an hour. I said we want to because we got so much to cover in this story. Yes. Basically where I wanted to start out with it is we'll kind of start out at the date of the incident and kind of work back and forth, you know, as we go through there. But for people that don't know, this started on, like I said, they went for their honeymoon on Sunday, the 17th of September. We're coming up on the anniversary, actually, of this as well, too. And so 10:30 p.m., September 19th, 1961, Betty saw what she described as a point of light in the sky. And she saw it moving, and it was below the moon and started traveling towards Jupiter. But it was going in upward west, direction, which for everybody that's shooting stars, so they don't go up. And so that right there was that. And so you're going to do it a little more justice than me. So I'll kind of let you take it from there on. Kind of the moments right there, like, took place right after she saw this motion, and when they started to realize this wasn't just a shooting star or some distant, anomaly.
Yes, they were just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire, when Betty saw this new light in the sky that shot up into the air, and she continued to watch it. It was a bright light night. The moon was about 3/4 full, and she and Barney were just having a terrific time returning from their vacation. They were well rested from the night before, had had a great time in Montreal, and then vacationing at a beautiful tourist town on the way through Quebec toward Vermont. And were just having a wonderful time. If they grew tired, they would stop for the night, but they had lots of energy. And they're driving south, and Betty's watching this light, and it's coming in closer and closer. And she says to Barney, "Barney, you have to stop the car." And he said, "Oh, Betty, I just want to drive home." But she said, "But Delcy, our dog, has to go for a walk." So Barney did pull over at the Mount Cleveland picnic area, which is just south of Twin Mountain, the town of Twin Mountain, if you have a New Hampshire map. And they walked the dog and looked through the binoculars at this object that had come in closer. And the thing that Barney noticed is that it would shoot out toward Vermont, and then, without turning the way that a plane would, it would come in a straight line back in his direction. And he was very curious about this, but he was a confirmed skeptic as well. He didn't believe this was even possible. So he got back into the car, and he enjoyed kidding Betty. And so he said, "Oh, Betty, it's just a plane or a Piper Cub or something, probably heading toward Montreal." And they continued driving south. Well, they next went into the north entrance of Franconia Notch. And if you have been to upstate New Hampshire, you'll know what a beautiful place that is. As you enter, there's a wide valley, and you see the mountains ahead. And then it narrows. And there's a small river running down one side, the Pemigewasset River, and the highway. And Cannon Mountain is there. That's a ski area. And just south of Cannon Mountain is the Old Man of the Mountain. And in 1961, you could just pull right off to the side of the road. This was the off season anyway. So they did for another look at this craft. And it was now hovering next to the Old Man's profile. And the profile is 48 feet from forehead to chin. And Betty and Barney said that that craft was at least 1.5 to 2 times the length of the Old Man's profile. And it appeared to be rotating and lighted only on one side. They got back into the car and headed south again. Betty continued to watch it, and it was flying in a zigzag pattern and a stair-step pattern, bouncing back and forth like a ping pong ball, or Barney called it a lot like a yo-yo, moving out and then coming back. But I said ping pong ball because that was the motion that the Navy pilots mentioned in the Tic Tac case. So that happened. And they continued south, And they left Franconia Notch, and now they were in the tourist area. But it was still the off season. And so the craft started to come in very close at that point. And Betty said to Barney again, you have to stop the car. It's coming in really close. You have to get a look at this thing. But before he was able to stop the car, to pull over to the side of the road, the craft surged ahead and stopped only 200 feet above the highway and sort of overhanging the right side if you're heading south. And so Barney had to pull the car directly into the middle of the road so that he wouldn't be under the craft. Nowadays, we know what happens to people who try to drive under the craft. They don't make it. They go up. That's right.
Well, as you're doing your story real quick too, it's one of those. I mean, let's talk about the bravery of Betty. I mean, most people would be, here's this thing, you don't even know what it is. It's chasing you down. And not only are you not telling your husband to floor it, you're telling him to stop the car because I want to get out and look at it. I'm like, that's completely opposite of what most people would be doing. They're just like, go, go, go. She's like, no, stop. I want to see this. Yeah.
Well, she was trying to identify it, and he was telling her it's only a conventional aircraft. So, they always bantered back and forth that way. And so Barney had to stop the car in the middle of the road. He got out. Betty didn't get out. She sat in the passenger side in the seat. He opened the door, stepped out, left the motor running, looked up at this craft and said that it looked like a giant pancake just hanging there in the sky. And as he was looking at it, he decided he wanted to step back for a better view. And when he did, the craft shifted location again to an adjacent field over toward the east. And so he walked across the road the rest of the way and stood at the edge of the field, still shaking his head, trying to convince himself that it couldn't be what they called a flying saucer in those days. Mm-hmm. And then the craft was now only about 100 feet above him. He put the binoculars to his eyes and he observed something that frightened him greatly. He saw figures dressed in shiny black uniforms. That's what Betty wrote from his statement in the very first report that they made to NICAP. They made a report to Pease Air Force Base before that. Mm-hmm. But the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena is who received all of this because they were afraid they'd be criticized if they reported to the Air Force that Barney had observed these non-humans looking down at him. So as he's looking up, all except for one of these entities turn around and move toward. That's what Barney drew when he arrived home.
Yes. Make sure I showed those for people.
And it shows those entities looking down at him.
I was reading two different reports. So is it actually maybe he's seeing 8 or 11? What is what is closer to the
number? At that point, he estimated it was between 8 and 11.
Okay.
As he was looking up. But so I can't answer that definitively. But anyway, there were little red lights that he and Betty saw. But then when these entities moved to the back wall, those lights started to slide out on little fin-like structures. And something started to drop down out of the bottom of the craft. When he saw this occurring, he thought that he was going to be captured, he said, quote, like a bug in a net, close quote. And that's when he became terrified, pulled the binoculars away from his eyes so forcefully that he broke the leather strap and went tearing back to the car to Betty, saying that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. As he was running back to the car, he noticed that the craft was now moving back in his direction. So there driving down the highway. He's speeding down the highway, actually. This is not a back road. This is Route 3.
Mhm.
And the major interstate had not been constructed that far north in that time frame. So he's speeding down the road, and all of a sudden, he and Betty hear a series of code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the vehicle. The car starts to vibrate, and an electrical tingling sensation passes through their bodies. Experiencers always talk about that electrical tingling sensation when they're being taken to craft, when they're on craft. And the next thing Betty and Barney knew, they were 30 to 35 miles down the highway. They heard
Wow.
a second series of buzzing sounds, and they didn't see the craft this time. They had memories, vague memories of finding themselves on a dirt road with tall trees all around. They remembered a roadblock. They didn't know where or when that occurred. And they remembered what seemed to be a very large fiery orb that was sitting either on the ground or close to the ground. And Betty said to Barney, "Well, Barney, now do you believe in flying saucers?" And he said, "Oh, Betty, don't be ridiculous. I can prove to you that I can make that sound." So he stopped the car. He drove from one side of the road to the other. He went quick. He stopped. He did everything to try to reproduce that sound, and he couldn't do it. So they just drove home. He was looking for a police officer to report this to. They were looking for a restaurant, maybe. They really wanted human contact. It would have made them feel better, I think. But they didn't find anyone along the way. They drove on home, and they had anticipated that they'd arrive between 2 and 3 in the morning. They'd been up in that area before, so they knew how long it took to drive home. And when they arrived, it was after 5 o'clock in the morning. In fact, I have the watch that Betty was wearing that night. And when she entered her house, well, she noticed that it had stopped running. And when she entered her house, she looked at the clock. She set her watch for 5:15, and she tried to wind the watch, but it never ran again, nor did Barney's watch. There were many mysteries, too, that they found that day. But go ahead.
I was going to say one of the things too is, and I never really saw in a lot of things. It's kind of one of those really obscure questions about what was the dog doing during this whole time? The dog's there in the car. You know, you always see the interviews and they never talk about, was the dog just calmly just like, "Yeah, what's up, Mom and Dad? See ya. I'll be right here." You know, just sit.
No.
Yeah, it's just
those buzzing sounds seem to hurt the dog's ears. She was standing up on the back seat looking out. She was a little dachshund and looking out toward the back of the car. And Barney later remembered in hypnosis a couple of years later that Delcy was shaking when he was returned to the car. He was returned before Betty. And she was stuffed as close to the seat as tried to fit underneath it as possible. And so he picked her up and she was just shaking, poor thing. After that, when they arrived home, she developed a fungus infection on her skin. Now, Betty and Barney didn't know if she'd ever had one before because they had adopted her. But it's interesting to me that Betty's dress developed kind of a pink powdery substance grew on it when she put it into her closet. It had been torn in several places. No explanation for how that happened. And when she took it out of the closet again, there was a pink powdery substance on it. And the scientists that I've talked to have hypothesized that that is either a yeast or a mold. and it did fluoresce under a UV light.
Wow.
And so I wonder if the entity's hands might have touched Delcy, or if maybe Barney or Betty had picked up this yeast or this mold inside the craft. One of the scientists who has a PhD in plant biology told me that he thought that what had happened is that Betty's and Barney's maybe clothing was sterilized through some kind of process that killed all the bacteria and the yeast. And when that happened, it provided the environment so that this yeast or mold could grow. It didn't happen to Barney's clothing because that went to the dry cleaners immediately. Betty's dress did not.
Wow.
So that's what the scientists hypothesize at this point.
Yeah, every time we do these things, I mean, it pops in my head is just modern day. You think CSI, you have all this stuff, you just hear these things. It's like, yeah, I've had all this. What am I going to do? Dry clean it? You're like, the evidence is gone. It's
Yes.
like every time. So you have to go ahead, Chris.
That makes me wonder, did they sterilize them before they brought them into the craft, or did they sterilize them as they sent them on their way? That makes me wonder, which process did sterilization happen in?
Right. And were they sterilized to begin with? That's a hypothesis of one of the scientists. Neither Betty nor Barney told Dr. Simon that they had gone through this process.
Kathleen, when you just mentioned the stopped watch, never ran again, that seems to factor into the X-Files episodes 30 some years later. What that's an indication of the importance of Betty and Barney's abduction story. But what are some of the other the really important legacy from this event that happened almost 60 years to the day? Why is this such an important case study?
Well, there was quite a lot of physical evidence in this study. There was a strong magnetic field around the trunk of the vehicle, where in the location where those buzzing sounds were striking. And that could be an explanation for why the wind-up watches were broken. The spring might have been affected by the magnetic field. In addition to that, it was scientifically investigated. The first investigator was Walter Webb. He was an astronomer who worked at the Hayden Planetarium in Boston. There were other scientists who were interested in the case too, Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson. And then Admiral Herbert Knowles lived over the river in Maine, and he was on the board of directors of NICAP. He had an interest in this too, and so did a lot of the enlisted men and officers at Pease Air Force Base. That wasn't part of the official report, but that's what happened. And Betty and Barney were a credible couple. They were well known in the state of New Hampshire for their civil rights activities. In 1965, Betty and Barney were invited to Lyndon Johnson's inauguration, and they took me along with them. I received an invitation too, and it was wonderful. That same year, Barney received an award from Sergeant Shriver from the Federal Poverty Program, because he and Betty and others had set up the Rockingham County Community Action Program to help the people who were financially needy in Rockingham County, and he served as the chairman of the first board of directors. Also, he received an award from the Archdiocese for Manchester, New Hampshire, for setting up a literacy program for the people of New Hampshire so they could learn to read. And if you could read in those days, you could vote. And also, after that, Barney was appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights as a state advisory board member. So he had a lot of awards given to him that year. This is after the hypnosis, after he worked through all of his trauma and was back doing the good things that he had always done in his life. And
yeah, I was gonna say, that's one of the things that, for me, that this is always I always hang my hat on this one, why I believe this one so much. And that was one of the cool things about having you as a relative, you know. And I'll start there. Is as a interracial couple, this is something where you're not going to bring attention to yourself. You know, society's already doesn't like you, and especially in the 1950s, 1960s. And that was, so here you have these two, you know, they didn't, once the attention got it, you know, it's like, so they're telling their story and you can see they didn't have the motivation. I mean, it's not like today where if I put myself in social media, you know, everybody's going to love me. No, this is, you know, if you could stay off the radar, the best, you know, better it was for them. And that was one of the questions I had for you, especially being, you know, niece for him. How did the family do, you know, when they first got married, you know, and then proceeded life? I mean, was everybody happy for it? Or, I mean, or was it just kind of like a mixed thing with this, you know, this couple?
most people were happy for them. We had a very open-minded family. Betty had a lot of Black friends.
That's good.
In the Portsmouth area, and she would bring them down to visit. I grew up across the street from my grandparents, who were Betty's parents, and so most people in the family accepted their marriage and their relationship. There was one uncle who was from Nassau and British, and he was the only one in the family who objected to it, as far as I know.
You mentioned some earlier. Has the watch been evaluated by scientists, or that's a relic you keep very close to you?
I keep it close to me for the time being, just because it was Betty's, and it has kind of emotional value to me.
Well, that was the thing, especially to show the connection. I mean, they contacted you after this incident as well, as a 13-year-old.
They contacted my mother. Actually, Betty called my mother. Barney said, Betty, don't ever tell anyone about this. No good can come of it. And in hypnosis, he was saying to Dr. Simon, I have to forget about this right away. I have to remove this from my mind. And so he had so much difficulty because he just wanted to make it go away. But Betty is the one who called my mother. We had a neighbor who was a physicist, and my mother said that she would call him to find out what he would suggest they should do. They'd already taken long showers, but they were fearful that they might have been contaminated because the craft came so close to them, especially to Barney when he was standing in that field and over the top of their car. And so my mother did call the physicist, and he, for some reason, said, Betty, if you have a compass, take it out to the car and see how the needle reacts. And so she did find her compass. Barney was becoming angry with her over that. He thought she was just doing too many things and not forgetting it. And so she went out to the car. She started on the side of the car and the compass behaved normally. But when she reached the trunk of the car, she noticed new shiny spots that hadn't been there the day before. And they were in that location where she and Barney heard the buzzing sounds striking the night before. She held the compass over those spots and the needle whirled. And the neighbors saw that, and Barney finally went out and tried it himself, and it whirled for him too. So that's what happened. There was a strong magnetic field around the trunk of the vehicle. And so I heard about it from my mother that day, but we wanted to go to Betty's and Barney's house. They lived about 19 miles away from my childhood home. And so my father promised us he would take time off from work early, and we as a family would drive to Betty's and Barney's house in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And we did within a couple of days. And so I got to see the spots myself, got to hear Betty's account of what occurred. And my father sat quietly in a corner of the living room with Barney. And my father told me later that Barney was very clear about what he saw, and that he saw what he believed were non-humans on that craft as it was hovering overhead. Barney was still waiting for a call from Pease Air Force Base. He'd already made a report with Betty, but they said that they might call back for additional information because there'd been a radar report that night at 2:15 or 2:14 a.m. actually. And that was just about the time they would have left after being on the craft. So go ahead.
Oh, large portion of your book captured is devoted to talking about Dr. Simon's regression tapes. What was recorded on the tapes, does that indicate that what Betty and Barney were talking about, their behaviors? Does it seem like later cases of abductions that the people or abductees are talking about the same types of behaviors that Betty and Barney experienced? Since you've appeared at conferences with Travis Walton and Michael Carter, do they say that their experiences are similar to Betty and Barney's?
Let me tell you that I've worked on 3 major studies with over 5,000 experiencers, and I was the Mutual UFO Network's director of the experiencer research team for 10 years. And we received about 100 reports every month. So I know quite a bit about what other people experience. And back in that time frame, in that early time frame, a lot of the things that people were experiencing are pretty much like what Betty and Barney experienced. There would be the physical exam, and then there would be the education. They'd usually be taught something, and then they would be released unharmed. Just as with Betty and Barney, all through history, experiencers have been reassured that they won't be harmed. They said to Betty and Barney, we only need to do a few simple tests, and then you'll be on your way. And So Betty didn't believe them when they were taking her onto the craft. This is one incident where part of her dress was torn. There's another incident later where it was torn too. But yes, they're over and over again. It seems to be more of a focus now, I think, on human reproductive system. They say that they're attempting to upgrade the human genome. They're concerned that our technological development is out of sync with our spiritual development. And when this happens, they have seen on other planets that a lot of times there was massive destruction. So they want to attempt to prevent that from happening here. And this is their interest in nuclear weapons. And it's been a long-term interest because they say that when we detonate thermonuclear weapons, what happens is it tears into the fabric between time, space, and other dimensions. And when it does that, it creates damage in other dimensions as well. And that's a major concern of theirs.
So I have a quick question. As far as the accounts of all the accounts that you've talked to people, you've studied people, is there like a certain demographic of people that maybe you can link? Maybe she's got brown hair, maybe she's got brown hair. I mean, that's not, I'm just making an example here, but is there something that you can intertwine that maybe they're picking on the same type of people to get certain type of information?
Well, let me begin by saying that they say initially they were just picking up people randomly, kids on the backlands of farms, people who were driving in cars, fishing, hiking, etc. When they found the characteristics that they were looking for, then they started to take people along family lines. So in research, 60% of the abductees know of other family members who were also taken. So that has occurred because the ETs say that by taking people along family lines, they can track their progress in the genetic upgrades that they're attempting to do so that we will become more survivable as a species.
That was a very good answer. So have you prepared over time that they may get you? Or are you not scared? Are you like, hey, take me, you can learn from me?
Well, if they wanted me, I'm sure they would have taken me. Other characteristics that experiencers have in common is in the general population, about 15 to 16% of people have Rh negative blood. Among those who are abductees, it's 33%. So, more than double the average population. Still, most are Rh positive, but there's definitely a statistically significant increase among Rh negative people. Also, Native Americans, people of Celtic descent, a higher rate in those populations.
Yeah, that might be what, because that might be because I'm negative. I'm Rh negative, and like I said, and I've got Scottish, descent. So that could be. That's no, I was, as you talked about, you kind of hinted just a couple minutes ago when we started talking about the abduction stories, and this is one. Like I said, not only just the fact of the couple wouldn't really speak out. The thing that was really crazy for me is when they went through the hypnosis. I mean, I know people, like you've talked about in a few of your lectures, where people are like, why is there such inconsistency between what they recall and then the hypnosis? I've always been through all the shows where we've talked about like UFOs in the Bible. We've talked about these things. people can only describe what they know.
Mhm.
This isn't like nowadays where we have all this internet searches, we have all this information to go on. You're talking to somebody who's in the 50s and 60s that's never seen this before, just got taken on a craft that they've never seen before. How are you going to describe this? Well, when people say, well, you had a shiny uniform, well, all he knows is the 1940s, the military uniforms. That's all he has to reference off of. You can't accurately describe something you've never seen before. When you describe the book, as you said, it looked like cellophane, with stuff writing on it. She's just going by, they wouldn't have a concept of, I think, and we're going to get into it here in a little bit, the star map. I mean, how is she going to describe a 3D, model that she's looking at?
How could she say that it looked like a holographic image
Yep.
back in 1961 until we developed holograms? And then she told Marjorie Fish that, yeah, it probably resembled a hologram.
And as we start getting darker, I may go visually off screen just because, with me sponging internet off of the neighbors, the lights levels getting a little darker here. So if I suddenly go away,
He's about to get evicted.
Yeah. So I just want everybody, I moved real quick because, being here in Florida, it's starting to get a little dark. And so it's kind of funny. So I apologize that all of a sudden I'm not in witness protection. I'm not suddenly, having to have my identity blocked.
Well, it could also be the craft is now starting to hover over the house and block the sun.
Blocking the light. Oh, I know. But yeah, it's when we talk about the abductions, with the hypnosis, regression stuff, Barney's reaction to talking about when he's being taken by the entities, that is, to me, just shows just the level of fear, and authenticity for me for this thing, because this isn't somebody that sounds like he's got a rehearsed story that I'm just trying to make up, like a great, he's, as you've described through the whole time going through the road, this is a straight, to me, I take him as a real engineer. The engineers, anybody who knows an engineer, they're not overly creative. They are literal. Things have to be literal. It's either this. So this isn't going to be somebody that's going to come up with a theatrical performance for an audio tape.
Right. And Barney was more like the engineer type going through this. And thank goodness for Dr. Simon, because he had developed a special technique during World War II that he used very successfully with veterans who were returning home from the war, terribly psychologically injured. They had psychogenically induced trauma that caused them to become blind when there was no physiological reason for it, to lose the ability to walk when there was no physiological reason. And he developed a special technique to help people through this. And Barney ended up developing bleeding ulcers. He was hospitalized because this was eating away at him so badly. He also developed high blood pressure. And these wouldn't recede with traditional medical treatment. So Barney was referred to Dr. Simon because of his outstanding history. There was a movie, Let There Be Light, made about his work. He was the head of the American Psychiatric Association at one time. He's in Who's Who in America. He taught at Harvard, taught at Yale, lectured at Harvard. And so he was really outstanding in his career and just the person that Barney needed to see. He knew nothing about UFOs or about alien abduction, but as a medical doctor and a psychiatrist, he was highly knowledgeable. He hypnotized Betty and Barney separately. And at the end of each session, he reinstated amnesia. So they couldn't recall what they had stated in hypnosis, and therefore they couldn't contaminate one another's information. Dr. Simon also said there was another reason for this as well, and that is at times both Betty and Barney experienced such fear and trauma, that if he had allowed them to remember that all at once, it may have magnified the traumatic experience for them. So he was highly skilled, thank goodness. And he saw them separately. And I wasn't a good typist then, but I have all 10 hours of their hypnosis tapes. And I did a comparative analysis of their separate statements for the book. So you read that in the book. It's not boring. I don't line up sentence by sentence and compare them. So I wrote the book in a manner that was interesting to read, but I point out the difference between their statements in hypnosis and a series of dreams that Betty had. And
that was chapter 6, wasn't it?
Could be.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's one that you just labeled hypnosis, I think is what, if I remember right on the book. Yeah.
So
yeah, go ahead.
So I did that comparative analysis. You'll read that in the book. And that's what convinced me that this was indeed a real experience.
Yeah, and Kathleen, you co-authored Captured with Stanton Friedman.
Yes.
We haven't really gotten to talk about his contributions to the writing of this book. He's bringing his scientific background, expertise,
Yes.
writing skills, research skills. What were Stanton's contributions to writing Captured?
Well, a lot of people don't know this, but Stanton's first big project when he went full-time as a UFO lecturer, investigator, was Betty's star map. And a brilliant woman from Ohio, Marjorie Fish, saw that star map in the first book that was written about their case, The Interrupted Journey. And so Marjorie saw that, and Betty had drawn the star map as the result of a post-hypnotic suggestion by Dr. Simon that she would go home and draw it if it didn't bother her too badly and if she could remember it accurately. And so she did go home, and with the next couple of weeks she drew it. Her rational mind took over at one point. She erased one line, and so there was one line that was off a little bit. But Marjorie read that book, and she was an amateur astronomer. She was a member of Mensa, and she went to the university. Of course, we didn't have computers. We didn't have even Xerox machines back in those days. So Marjorie had to sit in the astronomy department with their astronomical catalogs and hand copy all the distance data for all of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood in all directions out 54 light years from the sun. And she was looking for Earth-like planets. So she in all built 14 models, and using monofilament line and beads of different sizes and colors to represent the type of stars were in that portion of the galaxy in all directions. After 4 years, she still didn't have a match. And so she really persevered. But finally, we advanced technologically, and we were able to have a better telescope that could go out on a satellite and that could look at the stars without the atmospheric interference that caused them not to be able to determine how far away some stars were. And so she had that new information. She took it home and she adjusted in one of her star models and added a couple of stars that weren't there previously, actually 3 of them. And she had a match for Betty's sketch. And then Stanton was called in. Coral Lorenzen from the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, of which Stanton was a member, called him and said, you know, if you are in Ohio to do a lecture, would you please visit Marjorie Fish and interview her and see what you think? She's done this work, and she would like to be able to find scientists to vet that work. And so Stanton did end up speaking in Ohio, and he went to see Marjorie Fish. He told me that he was very impressed with her. She was highly intelligent and felt much more comfortable speaking with scientists than with the general public. And so Stanton decided that he would find scientists to vet her work. He found Alan Hynek, Dr. Alan Hynek, who had been the director of Project Blue Book for all of the years that it was Project Blue Book. And he vetted Marjorie's work and said it was accurate. Then he found Terence Dickinson. No, it wasn't Terence. That's later. Then he found David Saunders, who was a statistician who worked on the Condon Project. He was one of the lead investigators, and he was the one who found the trick letter. And so he looked at this from a statistical analysis and said that statistically, this was like 10,000 to 1 chance that this could have happened just by accident. And then the University of Ohio, or I guess it was Ohio State University, students in the astronomy department also vetted Marjorie's work. And by then there was a computer. So they did a computer model, and they too deemed it to be accurate. So there were special characteristics that these stars had. And to move on to Stanton again, before I forget it, he was the one who spoke to Terence Dickinson, who was a writer for, I think it was Astronomy Magazine or Sky and Telescope. And Terence looked at it too. And he's the one who stated that all of the stars on Betty's map are in a plane, like pepperoni on pizza. So instead of like raisins spread out in a fat loaf of raisin bread. And what that means is it would be logical if aliens were going, exploring space, to go on the route that they went on. Also, all the stars on Betty's map were sun-like, although only 5% of the stars, out 54 light years from our sun, are considered to be sun-like stars. And all of the sun-like stars in that volume of space are on Betty's map. So the chances of that just happening by chance are astronomical.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about it. It's just, here's someone without formal training, and she wrote this. And that's why when you see these doubters and these ones that try to debunk it, I'm like, okay, you tell me how somebody who's not an astronomer, doesn't know star systems, doesn't know this stuff, wrote, even just me, if we took all 4 or 5 of us right now and said, okay, draw a star map, how many of us are going to get it that accurate?
I mean, with the technology, we possibly
No, I mean, just right now, you don't have the technology. I mean, right now, grab a piece of paper and draw out a star map.
Probably won't happen. But
it won't happen. That's why I lend so much credibility to her coming up with this. I mean, just the mathematical odds of her even just getting lucky coming up with it it's astronomical. The odds.
That's why I was piggybacking off of what you said. with no technology, with no internet, with no computers. It came from recollection of what she seen, so she could draw that. You know, I mean, so the debunkers, it's evidence, it's clear evidence that she drew it not in the modern day, in the past.
Yes, that's true. And, you know, Marjorie Fish was a genius too. She was a teacher at the time she did this work, but then she went to work at the Oak Ridge Nuclear Laboratory as a research assistant, which was much better suited to the type of person that she was and her level of intellect. So, and Betty was very bright. Betty had a tremendous memory for detail. That's one thing that I noticed about her.
In doing research on this, she had other encounters. Did you get firsthand on any of her other encounters? She said she encountered UFOs many more times throughout her lifetime. Did you get any other encounters, or nothing was as vague, nothing was as vast as this one?
Nothing had the evidence that this encounter had. Knowing what I know about experiencers, I wouldn't be surprised if that was not Betty's first rodeo. I expect that she was probably taken before but didn't remember it. And so it appears that she was taken later. She, in hypnosis with Dr. James Harder, said that she had been visited about once a year. And in her files, I had a couple of records of people who were friends of hers who would be riding with her at night when a craft would come down low over the car. It would seem that the car was just going up a hill, and the next thing you knew, they were on a new stretch of road. So I suspect that Betty was taken probably many times throughout her lifetime.
Wow.
And yeah.
Yeah, you hear about that's a family trait. Is Betty the only one in your family that has been abducted or seen a UFO?
No, she isn't the only one. That's something that Dr. Harder explored with some members of the family, especially those who had close encounters with craft. And I can tell you that my mother did see a UFO before Betty did. In fact, back in the 1950s, she was out grocery shopping on a Friday night and with another aunt. And as she was returning home, there was a very large craft hovering over a field with smaller craft flying around it. And it was a multiple witness sighting. There were people who lived in a house nearby, and they came out of the house and they saw it as well. Then when I was probably a teenager, my mother had another Friday night grocery shopping trip, and she would always go and arrive home at about the same time. And my father would stay home with my two brothers and I. On this night, my mother didn't arrive home, as she always did. And my father was becoming worried. In fact, the kids would stay up until she'd arrive home. But he ended up sending us to bed. And finally, she did come home, not realizing that she was late. She had purchased frozen food and it had thawed. She had purchased ice cream and it was soup. So that points to the idea that she had a missing time experience as well. I know that Dr. Harder worked with her. So it has happened to other family members, and I'm not at liberty to tell you who they are or anything about them.
You know, we might have a special thing since I'm outside and on location reporting. I'm going to try to catch on the camera. I might be able to see SpaceX just launched the Crew Dragon.
I know that's what we've got.
So I may be able to catch that live on camera for everybody here. Oh, yep, there it is. We'll see if
Yep.
everybody can see it. There's an orange fireball. I'm not sure if it's going to show up or
Yep.
not.
Yeah,
You can kind of see it.
we can see it.
It's kind of going up over the tree line right now. I don't know if anybody can see it now. That's
I want to share the video, the live feed, but I feel like we get banned on YouTube. So
probably. Yeah,
not gonna do it.
I was hoping everybody would be able to see it. Just like I said, it's just not enough light level on the camera. But yeah, like I said, the fireball just went up there. So I wish we could have seen it.
M.A. Allen says, "What?"
See right there.
There it is.
There it is.
Oh, yes.
I got it. So there it is. That's it going up right there. All right.
M.A. Allen said, "Are you reporting the news next?"
Well, it might as well be. It's like, how's the weather out there? It's dark.
Humid.
it's humid. Yeah, it's not what I expected for my studio space today. But no, I just honestly, just like for me, it's when you look at I'll try to keep it there, see if I can keep it in there for people to see. You can kind of see I just through everything, like even Betty's recollection when she starts talking about when they're inserting the needle. I mean, that's just to rehash while we're running out of time here. That to me is so telling as well. And that's where you said, and you lay it out in your books too, because there's the debunkers also have, that's one of their criticisms always. It's just, her story is different. The tapes are different than the stories. Well, when you have just anything, when you have something that's trauma, your mind tries to cope with this and figure out a way to somehow make sense of something that doesn't, that's chaotic.
Yes.
And her story, when you can just tell, same way with Barney, just same way with her, when she's in tears talking about, I don't want him to put that. That's the largest needle I've ever seen. Don't do that. It hurts. And she describes what we'll call the leader, when he comes up, puts his hand on her head and the pain goes away.
Yes.
It's the pretty, telling stories. And that's one of the things I always, hang on, which is pretty cool.
And she had that amniocentesis a few years before it was being used in hospitals. So just more evidence. There's more evidence in the new book as well, because after Stanton and I wrote the first book, I didn't stop my search for scientists who were willing to look at things. In the book, I published the symbols that Betty saw on the craft, and Dr. Don C. Donderi and Stuart Appel. Stuart Appel from the State University of New York, psychologist and dean, assistant dean. Dr. Donderi, McGill University. He's worked on one study on experiencers with me. And then Bud Hopkins as well. They used symbols that Bud Hopkins had been collecting since the mid-1970s for this research project that they did to try to determine if they could hypnotize students and they would sketch the same kind of symbols that experiencers were reported seeing on the craft. So they had all of these different symbols from the students and from the abductees, and they put them all on separate pieces of paper. So they all looked the same. And then they gave them to the students. And Dr. Donderi had developed a scale that they would use to evaluate those symbols, kind of a statistical scale. And what the scientific team discovered is that Hopkins abductees symbols were very much alike, but the symbols that were drawn by the students were very different. And so the scientists said that this is evidence that alien abduction might be real. Dr. Donderi saw Betty's symbols in the book, and he got in touch with me and asked if I would mind if he took a look at them with the scale and compared them to the other symbols in that study. And I should say that Betty's symbols were in my locked file cabinet. No one saw those until they were published. And Dr. Donderi said that Betty's symbols are very much like the symbols that Bud Hopkins experiencers had been sketching since the mid-1970s. So that's just more evidence.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm fairly new to this as I'm getting more and more involved in all this. So has anybody ever checked to see, did Bob Lazar ever see these symbols on any of the crafts when he was working in S4?
Not that I'm aware of.
So I was curious about that, like if maybe this, if there's something like, have you ever, because I don't even know, has anybody ever asked him of that? I wonder, because I mean, it seems like with his knowledge of the craft that he may have seen some of those symbols somewhere.
Possibly, but who knows? I certainly don't know.
With the symbols you were talking, it seemed like all these abductees were drawing the same symbols. There's a book that Betty wanted to take as a souvenir, but 40 years later, when you're getting reports and talking with witnesses that you document in your the alien abduction files, things. There are reports where things are getting creepier. There are reports about like the little babies in vials. That seems more like a nightmarish type situation. It seems very different from what Betty and Barney discussed on their tapes. Is that an indication that things are changing with the abduction program?
Not necessarily, because they were prepared when they took Betty and Barney. They were all set up to do what they did with Betty and Barney. They took genetic material from Betty. They took genetic material from Barney that they could use to create a fetus. And so, that's probably what was happening with them and continued to happen. Some people are saying now that that program has ended. I don't know if that's true, but many experiencers believe that it has ended. Many people on my team, which grew to 50 people, I just stepped down recently, said that they haven't been collecting many reports of people having that DNA extracted for these types of studies. The ETs, as I said earlier, wanted to upgrade the human genome. And in my opinion, the best way to do that is to create the blastula, implant the blastula, with the mother's genetic material, the father's genetic material that has been altered. The DNA has been altered to upgrade humans. And to do this and then implant that fetus into the mother. She would have to be made pregnant first, so they would have to have done something for that to occur. But for that child to be born to human parents and raised on Earth and enculturated here makes a lot of sense to me, because you know, my background's in sociology and psychology. When you have feral humans who've never been around humans before, they were terribly mistreated and maybe locked away as children. They can never, ever enculturate into our society. They can never behave like humans. So it makes sense to me that these children are being born to humans. And I know I don't do research with children, but Mary Rodwell in Australia does. And Mary has worked with many, many children whose parents have been taken. And they have special properties. You've heard of indigo children. They're very bright. They can speak kind of a light language. They can do healing, facilitate healing on people. They have telekinesis, all sorts of traits. They're telepathic. So these children are very unique. And Mary believes that they were created this way. And I tend to agree.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree too. Yeah, unfortunately, we are at the time there, because I said we got to wrap it up here. Mark, I'm going to have you hold up the book, because it's not going to do me any good, because everybody's just going to see a blank screen. That one right there, Captured. Betty and Barney Hill, a UFO Experience, written by Kathleen Marden and co-authored by Stanton Friedman, which, I mean, I can't ask for a better co-author.
Right. He was wonderful to work with. I enjoyed the 14 years that we worked together.
Yeah, I regret it's one of those things. If time machine, I'd go back so I could meet him. That was one of those. Got into this program a little too late. But go to Kathleen-Marden.com to get more information on her upcoming appearances, information on her books. Go to Amazon.com. You can purchase all of her books there. That's in. Kathleen, I just thank you so much for coming on. This some people are saying here too, same thing. Just thank you for such a well-organized, conversation. I mean, it was fantastic. Loved it.
Thank you. My pleasure. And autographed copies of my books are available at my website as well.
Awesome. I hope to meet you in person sometime so I can have you actually physically sign the copy there for me.
I hope so too.
So, and next time, like I said, hopefully if we get you on it again, I'll have hopefully lighted studio so that way you can actually see me instead of just the blank screen. So, all right, Kathleen, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And
yep, fireworks are starting. We're right next to Disney. Oh my God! Why don't I just do this here? Let's see. Well, how about that? You can't ask for a better send off for her, right?
How about you just go to Disney property and just
let's go. Let's see if we got him here. There we go. See there, everybody can see him. So we got some fireworks for Kathleen as she's leaving. So. We've had a little of it all tonight, haven't we? Yeah.
Luckily, you got a screen porch, or you'd be fighting mosquitoes.
No, I know. Yeah, that's it. Fantastic there. All you'd be hearing is slapping noises as I'm trying to take out the bugs. So everybody, if you want to help the show have more reliable modems, you can support us at patreon.com/3Beards Podcast, or you can go to redbubble.com and go to 3Beards Podcast and buy some merchandise. Help us that way, though. We check us out on all the social media, follow, go to YouTube, subscribe. Make sure that you hit that notification bell and comment. The comments help us out so much. Mark Eddy, can't thank you enough for coming on again, helping us out, sir. Check him out. Blogspot. Blog Talk, Nightlight. You can also go subscribe to Barbara DeLong and catch those archives on YouTube as well. But thank you for watching from the On Location show. So I'm just bummed that we didn't have an actual flyover by UFO. That's what I was hoping for.
Kind of.
I know we kind of did. I mean, we had a rocket launch and we got a few fireworks. I'll keep look at that there. See.
Yeah.
What a day. So so everybody appreciate it. You're just gonna have to imagine me giving you the the normal prayer sign. Thanks for watching, everybody. Good night.